You are listening to Real Life and Other Fantasies, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello, fellow storytellers, and welcome to this edition of Real Life and Other Fantasies. Our guest today is an international traveler, educator, and ambassador, but I know him because of a connection much closer to home. His son is married to my daughter, so we're sort of in-laws, and we share two awesome grandchildren. He's called Poppy, and I'm Papa Mel, and those names are given to us by our grandchildren. Bill Clabby is our guest today. Bill, how are you and Joan doing over there on the West Coast?
Hi, Mel. It's good to talk to you as always. We're doing fine. We're doing some construction today, so it's been a little messy. It's nice to take a break and talk with you about whatever we talk about.
Right. I appreciate you taking the time out to talk. Bill recently retired after more than 30 years in university international education. He worked for the University of California in San Diego and UC Irvine, St. Edwards University in Austin, Texas, and International Studies Abroad in Austin. Several significant experiences shaped Bill's interest in cross-cultural affairs and international relations. The first was a full year of study abroad in France at the University of Bordeaux. After graduation, he and his wife served for 2 years as Peace Corps volunteers in Senegal, West Africa. Later, he taught in Japan. The Clabbys also served as a host family for over 250 international students for anywhere from 1 month to 24 months in duration. So, Bill, my first question for you is, having lived in Africa and Japan, what were some of the things those cultures had in common that surprised you, and which parts were the most different?
Okay, well, I think one thing that would be different about Africa and Japan is that Japan was a very group-oriented culture, very much of a uniformity and the valuing of having a same perspective and always aware of the perspective of everyone around you. In West Africa, it was much more individual. The culture was more individualistic, although they also had a strong sense of community. So the sense of community was in common, but the way it played out was a bit different than in Japan. When we first arrived in our village in the south of Senegal, we were doing introductions, and I found one thing that was really interesting was when an older man or older woman would come up. I had learned up in the north that you don't look them in the eye, you look down. It shows respect. And one of the older men came up to me, and I wasn't looking him in the eye, and I didn't speak Jola yet. That was the village language. And he asked another guy who was there, why isn't he looking at me? And he says, the man wants to know why you're not looking at him. And so I said, well, I learned up in the north that it's not polite. I was trying to be respectful. He says, well, he really wants you to look him in the eye so he sees who you are. I said, well, thank you, because that's how my culture is. Looking somebody in the eye shows respect and shows a desire to connect with them and be honest. So there are many things that were similar and different, but I would say those are a couple of things I would say.
Okay. So I understand you speak 7 different languages. So what's the closest you ever came to inciting an international incident by saying the wrong thing in the wrong language?
It's probably happened many more times than I'd like to admit. I wouldn't say international incident, but well, that's a good question. I have to rack my brain for this one. But in Senegal, because we were learning a language, Jola Casa, which is only spoken by maybe 4,000 people in the whole world.
Wow.
So, and there's no book. There was no grammar book. There was no vocabulary book. All of that had to be learned the way I learned English as a baby, through osmosis. You know, you hear people, you watch people, you imitate people, you make mistakes, and then you finally get it right. So in the village, that I'm sure many times I said the wrong thing. There were little things like if I'm going outside um, and and I'm going somewhere that I like I'm leaving somebody's house, and they're very social. So they said, "Well, where are you going?" And if I'm going somewhere like I'm going back to my hut, then I would say "Bonijo tieng," I'm going outside. And they told me to say that so that the little kids wouldn't follow. But sometimes I'd say "Bonijo tieng," and the kids would jump up just to follow every step we took. So, I mean, they've never had somebody from the United States live in their village. And so it's a unique experience. So the kids were always curious about us. And that was one of the fun things about the experience. But yeah, I'd have to say many times I said things wrong. Here's one. When I was in Japan, I was working with a teacher and I was trying to say, I was learning Japanese, learning to write Japanese. And I was looking at, there's the sound and then there's the character, the Chinese character. And there are many words where it's the same sound, but a very different character, different meaning. So the word I was trying to come up with and write was shiakusho, which means city hall. And it's shi yakusho. And the shi part, I was looking for the one, I thought I had the character for city. So city hall. But what I actually had said was death hall, because she is also death. So we didn't count it as an international incident, but it was funny. And the guy, he was very polite, because I asked, I said, could you help correct my writing? And he comes and looks at it. And there was just this momentary flash of amusement, but he didn't laugh and he kept it to himself. And he says, well, this one, everything else is fine, but this one, we need to change it to this character. And he didn't even say, you said death. He was being very polite. But yeah, that was just a funny moment.
Yeah, that's a good one. So I remember right around the time our kids got married, I remember you having to give a talk to a group of French visitors, and you spoke in French without using any notes. I can't even speak in English without notes, and it's the only language I speak. How did you train yourself to do that?
I studied in France, as you mentioned, for a year as an undergraduate student. I'd had 2 years of college level French. I'd had 3 years of actually junior high school French, which wasn't worth a lot. But I got to France, and my French was still terrible. And I knew it. And I wanted to get as fluent as possible. So I would actually ask French people to correct my French. I would have something written, a book or something, and I'd read a page and I'd say, okay, now critique my French. And this is for pronunciation. And I went through like 3 French students before, and they didn't really know what to tell me. The third one said, you just sound so American. The fourth one listened really carefully, and I said, okay, is it the U, or is it the R, or is it the some other sound, ooh? And he goes, no, those are okay, but you still sound American. I said, so why? And he said, c'est la musique de la langue. It's the music of the language. So I had never had a professor who said, pay attention to the intonation. So like if I say I'm going to the store and I'm coming home, if I want to be emphatic, I say I'm going to go to the store and then I'm going to come home. So I tried to use that intonation in French. Doesn't work. You don't say je vais au marché et je reviens chez moi. They said that sounded American. So I said, well, how do you say it? And they said je vais au marché et je reviens chez moi. So it sort of goes up and then back down. So suddenly it unlocked a whole range of things I could do, because I could hear how the French people said it, and then I imitated that. And what else I did was, because it felt strange to say some of the sounds, like the U is a sound we don't have in English, but it's very common. And so I felt sort of like I was not me. So I decided I would be like an actor. I'll be a French actor. I'm going to act like a French guy, and I'm going to sound like a French guy. And that helped me a lot to get over myself. And then over time, it's just practice, just using it and having lots of conversations not being afraid to make mistakes. That's probably the biggest thing. You have to be able to say, okay, I'm going to make a ton of mistakes. That's okay. I'm going to keep pushing through, because I realized for when a baby learns their language, they're making all kinds of mistakes, but it's okay. And when somebody is not a native speaker speaking English, I'm fine with them making mistakes. And it's if they make the effort, I'm going to make the effort to understand them. So once I got over myself and I realized that people actually want to help and want to understand, I got to where I could speak a lot better.
So if you were saying, pardon my French, that would have a whole different connotation, whole different context than somebody who might say that here, who might have used a profanity or something.
Absolutely, yeah. It's one of those things. You do find phrases you can use that help excuse the mistakes that you're going to make, and I had phrases for that all over the place.
All right, so going back to Senegal for just a moment, while you and Joan were there, what are some of the memories that you've carried to this day from that experience?
Well, really, we lived in a small village of about 200 people on an island, and so it was very much village life. You hear cows and goats and pigs running around; they're all around you. And when we ate, there would be a large bowl. I'm talking about maybe 2 feet diameter.
Wow.
That would have usually rice and fish. And there were about 10 of us sitting around that bowl on little teeny benches that are only about 8 inches off the ground. And so you're sitting very low, and you only eat with your right hand. That's true throughout the Muslim world and throughout most of Africa. If you don't have silverware, which we didn't use silverware, you're using your right hand. So you're reaching in and you're eating. Well, while we were eating, you're eating rice and fish, and pieces of rice or fish or fish bones would fall to the ground. Well, the chickens would come in and try to eat the things that fell. And so with your right hand, you're eating. With your left hand, you're grabbing chickens and throwing them out the window, which is open. And then they just come running back in and they try to get more food. So that's one memory that is solidified in my brain. It's just meal times and what that was like. But the sound of the mortar and pestle pounding the rice, and that was often early in the morning and also later in the day. It's sort of like a percussion of a drum on the dirt, on the earth. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like a heartbeat of the earth. I love that sound, and it was something we'd hear every single day. And when I talk about the mortar and pestle, the mortar, I think, is the bowl part. It was about 3 feet high, and then the pestle was about 4 feet long. So it's like a large, much thicker than a broomstick. And so they would pound, and that's to get the hull off the rice. And so it's a big thing that they're pounding. So it makes quite a sound, but it's not a loud sound. It's more of a muffled sound, sort of like if you were tamping soil with a large, heavy object. So that sound was something I will always think about when I think about Senegal, and just the people, the smiles of people. People were really very kind and generous with us, and I knew very early on I was going to learn a lot more than I would ever be able to teach because I'm in their environment. So it behooves me to listen and to watch and try to understand and also understand the language, but really just to understand what motivates people. That is another part of it's not so much of a memory, but it's more of an attitude, a perspective of my heart of I want to understand, and I know I'm not going to understand everything, but over time I got to understand quite a bit more, and I always found that valuable, and I carry that to this day.
Okay, I know social media wasn't around then, but have you been able to were you able to maintain any kind of friendships or relationships with the people there?
Well, we had some good friendships with people there. It was before the internet existed, really. There was ARPANET probably somewhere, but like nobody used internet in 1985, and cell phones weren't being used for another decade, and so or more in the United States. So yeah, it was not something that was easy to maintain. We wrote letters. That communication was not necessarily very clear because we would write and tell them what we were up to, and we would ask, so tell us what's happening in the village. And the person, and we saw this happen sometimes when somebody would have, there'd be a letter in French, and we'd write in French to them. But somebody else would write a letter in French, and what they would do is find somebody who spoke French, and they would basically do polite formule de politesse, polite formulas, phrases, as introduction. We greet you warmly and wish you that you have perfect health and joy with your family, blah blah blah. And then they would, in the middle, they would say so and so died, and then they would finish with polite formulas. Say, we want to leave you with warm regards, and until the next time we meet. You really didn't get any meat in the middle. It was all bun and no meat. So that's kind of what the letters looked like that we got back. So it wasn't a very clear communication, and we have not been back, mostly because the cost of flying there was so high, and we didn't have a lot of money while we're raising kids. And then there was the malaria issue. If you're under 5, you're not supposed to take the medicines. It's not good for you, and et cetera, et cetera. So we actually haven't been back. So I would not say we have close relationships. We have connected with a number of people and stayed in touch over the years. It's just not a close friendship.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, so let's take the John to your other destination of teaching in Japan. So we'll ask this question, then we're going to take a short break. So what's one thing, or maybe a couple of things, that someone might need to fully understand and appreciate before going to live in Japan?
There is a lot I could say on that one, but I'll start with something more basic. We lived in a small house, and it was Joan and I and Abe and Jacob, our first 2 kids. Our third wasn't born yet, and so we needed a refrigerator. What they had in the house was like a dorm refrigerator, which doesn't hold enough for a family of 4. And if in the U.S., what you would do is say, well, I need a refrigerator, and they provide the housing. We were paying for it, but they provide it, and so it's sort of like they're the host. So I asked somebody, another JET program teacher, another one of the English teachers, how would you go about asking about this? Because I said, and they saw the refrigerator, they said, oh, that's never going to do. And they gave me really good advice. They said, don't ask for it. Don't even, and certainly don't be pushy. They said, simply ask, where could you buy a refrigerator? Pretty innocuous thing to say. And so I did. And so my boss at the city hall, not city hall, but at the education center said, I'll get back to you. And nothing happened for 2 weeks. And I didn't know, and I was thinking, well, we need to have something here just for our food. But they said they would get back to me. I'll trust them. And 2 weeks later, he called me over to the door at the office, and he said, come with me. And I didn't know where we were going or anything. And I get in a car with them, and we go and meet somebody, and they have a little truck, and on that truck is a refrigerator, a bigger refrigerator, a very nice one. And what he had done is put out word, does anyone have an extra refrigerator so that we can give this to the teacher while he's here for a year? And so they did. We drove together to the house. We put it in, plugged it in. It worked fine. Thank you very much. Very nice of you. And the main lesson there was, don't push somebody. Trust that they will do what they can to help, and sort of be patient. we can be very impatient in the United States and in the West. And so I took them at their word, be patient, just ask. And that really worked well. And I used that many times during the year that we were in Japan, is just be open, be patient. Don't be, certainly don't ever be pushy or insulting or any of that, but just trust them. And people were incredibly helpful, really, really kind and helpful to us.
That's probably some advice that Americans could heed, just being a little bit more patient sometimes. Yeah. Well, I need to take a short break right now. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Bill Clabby and find out what advice he has for anyone who might be interested in studying or teaching abroad or hosting international students. We'll be right back. Are you tired of the rush of city life and need to get away? Head down to the Texas coast for a day of fishing in the Gulf of Mexico. Whether you want to fish off the jetty, wade fish, or have a fishing guide take you and your friends out for a day, Port O'Connor Rod and Gun can accommodate your request. Port O'Connor Rod and Gun has all of your fishing needs. They also have the connections to set you up for whatever type of fishing you desire. Port O'Connor Rod and Gun has all your fishing and hunting needs. Look them up on the web at pocrods.com. That's pocrods.com. pocrods.com. My friend Deb Powell is the owner and operator there, and she will be waiting to hear from you. Call her and she will hook you up. That's pocrods.com. We're back with our guest today, Bill Clabby. So, Bill, how does one start a career in international education, and what was the most gratifying part of your career?
Two very good questions. The first thing about starting a career in international education is to determine what aspect of it you want to be a part of. And there are many. So I'm going to just lay out a few, and that's a starting point. If you want to teach abroad, there are levels of types of teaching position that are available, and the more education you have, the more likely you are to get one of the better jobs. You can go especially to like Korea, maybe China, Japan, and you can find jobs if you just have a degree, especially a bachelor's degree or higher, in anything. You would probably be able to get a job. The next step up is to get a TEFL certificate, teaching English as a foreign language. There are TEFL certificates. There are some that are 2 weeks online. There are some that are 2 years in person. There's a whole range there. And obviously, if you invest more time, then you're going to have a better quality degree, and then you'll be more qualified as well. So getting a TEFL certificate is another qualification for teaching abroad. Obviously, you can get a master's in teaching English as a foreign language, and that'll allow you to teach at a university abroad. So first of all, that's qualifications and types of jobs. Types of jobs could be small private schools. Like in Japan, they call them juku. In Korea, they call them hagwons. There's like supplementary education centers. If you want to do something like that in a small town, then you don't need as much of a qualification. You have to be a little more careful. You probably will get paid less, and you have to make sure that they will pay you, because there are some that are not well reputed. But there are a lot of very good ones out there. If you have higher qualifications, you can teach more. Now, teaching English abroad is one skill and one type of job. If you do what I did, which is study abroad, and I worked at a university level, there are many jobs in that. You could be an advisor to students who want to study abroad. You could be an advisor to international students coming in. Those are quite different from one another, even though they seem really similar. If you're advising students coming in, you need to learn about visa regulations in the United States, because that's a key to their staying and doing their studies. If you're going on study abroad, usually there are organizations that help you arrange that. So you don't have to be the expert on all those visas. You're helping the student prepare to integrate well into that society and that culture. So study abroad versus international student advising are two aspects of that. If you work for a company like ISA, International Studies Abroad, that I worked for, there are different sectors there. There are people who travel to universities around the U.S. to tell students about those opportunities. That would be like a rep position. Then there are people who might be on the phone answering questions. So a student says, I want to go to France somewhere, and I am a biology major. So you might find what universities have the kinds of classes you want to take and help bridge that gap. So those are a couple of jobs. There are some jobs that are more business oriented, sort of like you're an admissions counselor. You might be helping them with paperwork or with their flights or their visa prep and things like that. You could also be on the receiving end overseas. You could be working in a study abroad office, and you might help students with their classes. That might be one job. You might be helping them with housing. You might be helping with excursions. You might be doing all those things. So a bigger office will sector that more. A smaller office, you might do more of those jobs. So that's another aspect of the job. There are many things you could do. The other thing I would say is talk to people who do that. I didn't even know that kind of career existed. And the way I found out was I studied abroad. But then when I graduated and then we came back from Peace Corps, I had a friend who called me and said, there's a job at the International Center that you sound like you'd be perfect for. And so I applied for it and I got it. But there are many aspects of that job. So I think it's first just figure out what you want to do and then talk to people who do that sort of thing. Call a study abroad office. Call one of the larger organizations that does study abroad, CIEE, IES, ISA. There are many others, CEA in Arizona. So there are many organizations, and then just talk to people and see what they might have opened up either at that time or perhaps in the future.
Okay, and next question is...
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, you asked what were some of the most gratifying aspects of the job, right? Yeah, so I would say one of the best, many, many things. This is a field with people who are genuinely interested in other people and have devoted their lives to understanding and to sharing that understanding. And then when they have that experience, like I did with study abroad, I wanted others to have that experience. So it's a field of people who are interesting, who have had really interesting experiences, and who are educators at heart. They want others to understand things as well. And that was incredibly gratifying because I got to work with people who were amazingly interesting and positive. That's worth more than money. It's not a highly paid field, but it is something that is really gratifying. I loved going to work every day. And so that was, I'd say, some of the best parts of it, but also using my languages. When I worked at St. Ed's, I was the Associate Vice President for Global Initiatives. My job was to build programs for our students overseas. So I had to find universities that might be compatible, talk to people either at conferences or by email or by phone, and then often visit them and see, is this an environment that's going to work for our students? That was fun. And my second week on the job at St. Ed's, I had to go to France and negotiate contracts with a French university in French. And I hadn't used French in 25 years in person, very sporadically. So that was a little bit, at first I wasn't sure if it was going to come back, but it did. And so, that was a great thing, being able to use languages and cultures, hosting visitors from all over the world, and taking the time to be able to see, okay, not just what's protocol, but what are the ways that people appreciate communicating with me and would like to hear from me, whether it be the more formality of Japanese or sort of the mix of formality and informality of the French, or whatever, those were all great things about
That's
the job.
awesome. Okay, so that's a nice segue for my next question about mentoring. So, can you tell us what you think the importance of mentoring others is, as well as seeking a mentor?
Yes, mentoring, no matter what you want to do, it is always good to have a mentor to help you see how something plays out. I can't say that I had a mentor early on. I kind of just sought out experiences, and those experiences led me to having opportunities later on. But I did seek out, when I was a student at UCSD, I thought at first I wanted to be an engineer. And I took all the pre-engineering courses, all the math, all the science, all the chemistry, the biology, physics, everything. And then I went to some events, like career events, where engineers would talk about what their job was like. And after a couple of those, I decided that's not what I want to do in life. So talking to people who are doing the job really is helpful. Now, after later on, I did have mentors who helped me see, okay, you've had a good career so far. If you want to take the next step, what do you want to do, first of all? And then if you want to take that step and do those things like building programs abroad, I needed to add to my education. So I had mentors. One good friend of mine, I would see at conferences a lot. And he'd say, okay, so when are you going to get your master's? At first, it was kind of a joke. But then, he said, I mean it, Bill. You really need to get a master's if you want to do the things, the next progression of things in this field. And I did. And as soon as, in fact, I wasn't even finished with my master's degree and I had an offer. That's when I got the offer at ISA. And that was a great job. I was executive vice president for research and strategic alliances, all because of my master's. So that really changed everything for me. So in terms of mentoring, when you become a mentor over time, I always love to help students or colleagues or people who are earlier in the field with their path. Either they're trying to figure out, well, what is the next step? What could I do? It can be somewhat like what I was explaining earlier, but probably in more detail. Or it might be, I'm not really doing what I want to do, and I want to do such and such, and maybe it's a different field. To mentor people is to help give them your own experience and help them figure out what their path is. And I love doing that. I always love doing that. And it's part of education. If you're an educator, you're a mentor to some extent. And so I always enjoyed that. And I know it was important for me to learn from other people. But and to this day, I still love to help people figure out what their path is. I'm a chair of a board of directors of the International Student Exchange Program now. And that's kind of a mentor position too, because I talk to staff there who are maybe the younger staff are trying to figure out what they're going to do, but also collaborating with other colleagues on the board who some of them do very different jobs and some of them do similar jobs. We share with each other what those ideas are.
Okay. Well, I know this obviously because I know you, but you've got a van since you've retired. That's sort of an adventure type of van that you take around the country. Tell us about that van and how that idea came about.
Yeah, you're leaving it to me to describe. So we got a van, a Sprinter van, one of the tall ones, and we bought it just an empty shell. And our goal was to make it into a RV, kind of a travel van, so that we could be with our kids and our grandkids and our parents and friends wherever they may be and not put them out. We'd be more flexible and more mobile. So the van. So first thing was we bought it, and then we spent about 3 weeks just intensive work building the inside of it, soundproofing it and insulating it and putting in fans and putting wood siding and inside and refrigerator, freezer, sink, all the stuff that you need in there. And that was a lot of fun. And then after we got it working, we took a couple trips with it, like 4 months for one trip and a couple months for another. We had thought we would have like an advertisement on it because they actually pay you when you have a wrap on your van for a company, they'll often pay you. It depends on where you're going to be and if it's a good fit. And so you might have this on there. And our goal was A, to make some money, but B, was to be more stealthy. Well, that wasn't, we weren't really liking the kinds of things that would be advertised. So we thought, well, we've got another idea. We're Christians. We strongly believe in caring for other people, and because of our faith. So why don't we talk to an organization that we like a lot called Blue Letter Bible? They do that you can see translations, you can see the Greek and the Hebrew and the roots of it and so on. It's all a free app. And so we liked their calendars, and we thought, well, maybe our van could be like one of their calendars, beautiful images and having scripture on it. And in the end, it didn't work out. So we thought, well, let's just do it ourselves. So we put Romans 1:20, God can be clearly seen in what he has made. And that's the sort of a subset of that passage. And then there's a blessing on one side, which is, may the Lord bless you and give you peace, which is Numbers. And we put those on there with an image of one of the most beautiful places we went, called Secret Beach, Oregon. So it looks like the Oregon coast all around the van. And then we have scripture on it. And our daughter said, why don't you do a website and an Instagram and a Facebook account? She's in PR. And we were a little hesitant, but we decided one of the things that we both said, but especially Joan has said over the years, is that's God's art. When something beautiful in nature, we see it, we should say that's God's art. So we created a natureisgodsart.com, and then we did Facebook and Instagram profiles on that. And we post sporadically. It's really not something that's not the reason we do it. It's more just an expression of who we are, a gigantic bumper sticker, I guess. And we've had many really, really positive interactions with people as a result, who see it and they go, wow. And a lot of people think it's a business because they see the website and there's a QR code. And we say, no, it's not a business. We just are saying what we believe. So it's kind of unique. It's very easy to find our van in a parking lot.
That's a very cool van. And that's why I let you describe it, because I didn't know any of that. I've seen the van, but I didn't know the story behind it. So that's pretty cool now that I know.
Yeah, that's how we got.
All right, so I've got one last question for you. It has to do with your name and your ancestry. So as I mentioned a couple of times, your last name is Clabby, and that also means, obviously, my grandchildren's last name is Clabby. So there's a little town called Clabby in Northern Ireland that's named after your ancestors.
Yes.
But I know you've been there before. So can you tell me the experience you had on a personal level when you visited Clabby, North Ireland?
Yes. So I'll start with, we went to the Republic of Ireland, and we met one of my cousins, who's a Clabby, in Ireland. And at some point, after having a Guinness with him, Michael Clabby, we were talking, and I said, I heard there's a town called Clabby, because I have a cousin of my dad's had visited there. I didn't know where it was exactly, but I knew it was in the north. So I'm in the Republic of Ireland, and we're talking about the Northern Ireland. So there's obviously a rift there, and this was in the late 80s. And so I said, I heard there was a town called Clabby. And he says, a town called Clabby? And I said, yes. And I said, and I heard it's in the north. And he goes, in the north? He did not say another syllable about it. So it's like, okay, he doesn't want to talk about this. There's something I don't know, but he doesn't want to talk about it. So years later, I was in Belfast for study abroad, and I was looking at Ulster University and University of Belfast, as well as for study abroad options. And one day there was going to be a short, like a half-day excursion, and one of the guys, a professor, said, I said, there's a town called Clabby, and I've always wanted to see it. And he goes, do you want me to take you? I said, I'd love that. So he says, okay, let's go. So we get in his car, and he says, as we go, I'm going to teach you about how you can tell whether a town is more Union, like UK supportive and Protestant, or whether it's more Republic of Ireland supportive and Catholic. He said, look for flags. And so I said, okay. So we'd come to a town and there'd be the Irish tricolor flag. And he said, this is a Catholic town. And we come to another town and it would have the British Union Jack. And he said, this is a Protestant town. Now, some of them had two flags, had both of those flags. So you knew it was a mix. And so at the entrance of each town, you'd see this. So we're driving through the countryside and he says, we're going to go through, I love these names, the three towns of Aucher, Clocher, and 5 Mile Town. So these are little villages, really. And you're going through sort of rolling hills, beautiful Irish countryside. And we're going through, we go through Aucher, and then we go over some hills, and then we get to Clocher, and then we go some more, and there's 5 Mile Town. And we go a little past 5 Mile Town, and all of a sudden we come up a rise, and we start to go down, and I see 12 flags in a row, all full Union Jacks. And I said, well, there's no doubt about what this, the background of this town. And we went to a petrol station, and this young couple was there. They just recently gotten married, and I said something like, well, and he said, and I said, I'm here today because I was visiting Belfast, and David Kitchen is giving me a ride here, but I'm really here today because my name is Bill Clabby. And the two of them look at me, they look at each other, and they look back, and they go, welcome to Clabby. And they proceeded to talk about, their lives and what it was about. Very nice people. And then they got Sam Hare, who is I call him the Postmaster General of Clabby. He runs the post office. And he had the Book of Clabby. So they said, we'll bring you the Book of Clabby, which shows where, how many Clabbys are in Australia, how many in the United States, and so on. And so we had a wonderful time. I stayed a couple hours, and we talked all that time. And after that, for years, Sam and I would write cards to each other. And so it was just a great visit, but it also helped me understand why my cousin in the Republic of Ireland, who's Catholic, wouldn't talk about Clabby, North Ireland, because it is Protestant. And I even went to the graveyard by the church, and it was a Protestant church. I don't remember what denomination. And there was not a single Clabby gravestone in that graveyard. It was all more English names. So I realized that was the rift. But see, that's where study abroad and being able to work with other cultures has been so rich. It helps me ask questions and understand different backgrounds, different people who, why they might not see eye to eye. And it's just all part of the landscape. That's how you interact with people.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I'm sure that's an experience you'll never forget.
I will never forget that. It was really a great day being able to go to Clabby, North Ireland.
Well, all right. So that's a great way to end this episode. So, Bill, thanks for being here. I appreciate you taking the time, and also thank you for being acting as a peaceful ambassador for the country. In various countries around the world, we all need more of that. And on a more personal level, I appreciate you being such a great co-grandfather to our grandchildren.
Yes. Well, Mel, it's been a pleasure talking with you, as it always is, and I'm honored to be a co-grandfather with you. I know our grandkids really love you, and so we shower them with our love, and that caring it carries through to wanting to understand and bridge gaps with people everywhere. So I know we share that in common as well.
All right. Again, thanks a lot, Bill. Bill Clabby has been our guest today, and I'm thankful for the stories that he's shared with us. So that's it for today's episode of Real Life and Other Fantasies. Join us again next time for another great storytelling adventure. Until then, don't forget to shine some light wherever you go. That was another edition of Real Life and Other Fantasies with your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Join us again next time for more stories about more things than you can imagine. Some of those true stories may even be about real life. See you next time.